You ever get lost in like a really good movie or video game? Where for a second you almost forget it's not real.
Yeah, it's like a fascinating thing with human perception, how we can just like get drawn into these like worlds and experience them so vividly.
Right, exactly. And that kind of brings us to today's deep dive,
Yeah.
the simulation hypothesis.
Oh, wow.
We're going to explore this mind-blowing idea that our reality could be a super advanced computer program created by a civilization way more advanced than us.
That's a big one.
We're working from like this overview article about it, and I'm super excited to unpack this with you and just like see where it goes.
I'm excited too. This will be fun.
Yeah, so let's start with the basics.
Okay.
The simulation hypothesis basically says that like an advanced civilization could have the technology to create simulations that are so realistic that the people in them wouldn't even know they were in one.
And it's not just about the visuals, right? Like it's simulating every aspect of reality, like even consciousness,
Yeah.
the laws of physics, the passage of time,
Yeah.
everything.
Right, like a video game, but on a level we can't even imagine.
Totally.
And that's where this guy Nick Bostrom comes in, right?
Yeah, Nick Bostrom, he's a philosopher.
Yeah.
And he like really popularized this idea with his argument that if civilizations keep advancing technologically, there are three possibilities.
Okay.
One, they never reach the point where they can create these simulations.
Okay.
Two, they reach that point but decide not to.
Okay.
Or, and this is like the crazy part, we're almost definitely in a simulation right now.
Wait, hold on. Why would we be almost definitely in a simulation?
So Bostrom's argument is that if even just a small fraction of advanced civilizations were to create these super realistic simulations,
Okay.
and if those simulations were full of like conscious beings, then the number of simulated realities would be way more than the original or base reality.
Oh, okay.
So like statistically it becomes more likely that we're in one of the many simulated realities.
So like the more simulations there are out there, the less likely it is that we just happen to be in the original reality.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a thought-provoking argument that kind of flips the burden of proof.
Yeah.
It's suggesting that if the technology is possible, the default assumption should be that we're in a simulation.
That's a huge shift in perspective.
Yeah.
It kind of
Yeah.
makes you look at everything differently.
Yeah, for sure.
But is there any like actual evidence for this idea?
Well, that's where things get a little more tricky.
Okay.
While there's no like smoking gun, there are some interesting arguments and observations that people who believe in the simulation hypothesis point to.
Okay, hit me with the weird stuff.
Okay, so one argument kind of compares it to our own technological progress.
Okay.
Like, think about how far video games have come just in a few decades.
Right.
From like simple pixelated graphics to immersive virtual worlds.
Yeah.
Like if we continue on that path, who knows what we'll be able to create in like 100, 1,000, or 1,000,000 years.
Yeah, if we can go from Pong to VR in such a short amount of time, it's mind-boggling to think what a super advanced civilization could create.
That's right.
Okay, so what else?
Well, there's also like the nature of the universe itself.
Okay.
Some physicists think that the universe might actually operate on like fundamentally mathematical principles.
Oh, wow.
Like in essence, the universe could just be like one giant computer program with everything encoded in mathematical relationships.
It's like reality is just math playing itself out.
Yeah, in a sense, yes.
Wow.
And this idea gets even more interesting when you think about some of the strange things we see in quantum mechanics.
Oh, yeah, quantum mechanics, always a good time for a mind-bending conversation.
Right. So things in the quantum world, they behave in ways that often defy our understanding of reality.
Okay.
Like, for example, particles can exist in multiple states at the same time until they're observed.
Okay.
It's almost as if the act of observation is making the universe choose a particular state.
Yeah.
Like collapsing a wave function.
I'm trying to wrap my head around that. It's like the universe is running a program in the background, and like our observations are somehow influencing the code.
That's one way to think about it.
Wow.
And it gets even weirder. Oh, no.
There's this concept called the fine-tuning of the universe.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that.
All the physical constants like the speed of light, the strength of gravity, and so on seem to be like perfectly calibrated for life to exist.
Okay.
Even small changes to these constants would mean the universe would be lifeless.
So either we're super lucky or someone set the dials just right for us.
Exactly. And that leads some to believe that this fine-tuning could be evidence of intelligent design, maybe by the creators of the simulation.
Okay, now we're getting into some serious whoa territory.
Yeah.
But before we get too lost in that rabbit hole, let's hear from the skeptics.
Right.
What are the arguments against the simulation hypothesis?
Well, one of the main criticisms is that despite all these interesting possibilities, there's still no direct evidence to prove we're in a simulation.
Yeah.
It's mostly a philosophical concept at this point.
Right. It's not like we can run a system diagnostics check on the universe, or can we? Just kidding. But seriously, how do you even begin to test for something like that?
It's a huge challenge, to say the least. Okay. And even if we could come up with experiments, there's always the possibility that the simulation itself is designed to stop us from detecting it.
Okay, so we're back to the Matrix.
Yeah.
We could be searching for an exit that doesn't exist or that's cleverly hidden from us.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so what are some other criticisms of the simulation hypothesis?
Another argument against it is like the complexity of simulating a whole universe.
Okay.
Like, think about all the particles, the interactions, the consciousness of billions of beings.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Even with really advanced technology, it just seems like an impossible task.
Yeah, it's like trying to run a simulation of every grain of sand on Earth, plus every living creature, plus all the stars and galaxies.
Right.
It would take a computer the size of a plant, maybe a galaxy.
Exactly. And even with like unimaginable computing power, there's the question of energy.
Yeah, where would the energy come from to run such a huge and detailed simulation?
Yeah, that's a great point. It's not exactly an energy efficient operation.
Yeah.
Definitely not. And isn't there also like a philosophical principle that argues against the simulation hypothesis?
Yeah, there's Occam's razor, the principle that says the simplest explanation is usually the best.
Right. So maybe things really are as they appear. We live in a physical universe that came into being through natural processes. No fancy simulation required.
Exactly. It's a reminder to be careful about jumping to extraordinary conclusions without extraordinary evidence.
So we've got some compelling arguments on both sides.
We do.
So where do we go from here?
Well, even if we don't have definitive proof, the simulation hypothesis brings up some really thought-provoking questions about the nature of reality, consciousness, and our place in the cosmos.
Right.
And that's what makes it so fascinating to explore.
Absolutely. And I'm especially interested in those real-world examples that kind of blur the lines between what we think of as real and simulated.
Yeah.
The article mentions a few that I'd love to dive into.
Yeah, I'm happy to dive into that. Some of them are really mind-bending.
Excellent. Let's take a closer look at those examples and see what they tell us about the possibilities and the limits of our understanding of reality.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the simulation hypothesis.
Okay, so we've laid the groundwork, explored the arguments for and against, and now I think it's time to grapple with the really big question. Like, what does this all mean if this wild idea is true? What does it say about us and the universe?
That's where things get really interesting. The simulation hypothesis isn't just about cool tech or mind-bending physics. It forces us to confront some really fundamental questions about the nature of reality, consciousness, and even free will.
Yeah, those are some pretty heavy topics. Let's start with free will. If we are living in a simulation like a giant computer program, essentially, does that mean our choices are predetermined? Are we really in control of our lives, or are we just following a script?
It's a question that has puzzled philosophers for centuries. But the simulation hypothesis adds a whole new layer of complexity. If our reality is ultimately governed by code, then the concept of free will starts to feel a bit shaky.
Right? Like, are we really making decisions, or are we just hitting buttons on a controller and the simulation's playing out the predetermined response? It's kind of a disturbing thought, isn't it?
It certainly challenges our intuitive sense of agency, the feeling that we're the authors of our own actions. But some argue that even in a simulated world, free will could still exist in a relative sense. Our choices might be constrained by the rules of the simulation, but within those constraints, we still have the ability to make decisions and experience the consequences of those decisions.
So it's like we're playing a video game. We can't change the fundamental rules of the game, but we can still choose how our character acts and what path they take.
Exactly. The simulation might set the stage, but we still have the power to write our own lines, so to speak.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this gets tricky. What about the nature of reality itself if we're in a simulation? What does it even mean for something to be real?
That's a question that really cuts to the core of our understanding of the world. If our experiences are generated by a computer program, does that make them any less real? Do we dismiss the beauty of a sunset, the joy of love, the pain of loss, simply because the source code might be different from what we imagined?
It's a tough one. I mean, it feels real to me when I stub my toe. It hurts when I eat a delicious meal.
Yeah.
I feel satisfied. Those are real sensations, even if they're ultimately just signals in a simulated brain.
And that gets to the heart of the matter. Our perception of reality is constructed by our senses and how our brains interpret those sensory inputs. So even if those inputs are ultimately coming from a simulated environment, our experiences are still real to us. The feelings, the emotions, the connections we make, those hold genuine meaning regardless of the underlying source code.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Like in those Matrix movies, the people living in the simulation had no idea it wasn't real until they were unplugged. Their lives, their relationships, their struggles all felt authentic to them, even though it was all a computer program.
Precisely, it raises a profound question. Does the source of reality negate the reality of our experiences? If a simulated sunset evokes the same emotions, the same sense of awe and wonder as a real sunset, does it really matter if it's ultimately pixels on a screen?
Wow, that's really making me think. Okay, so let's shift gears a bit. If we entertain this idea that there's a higher level of reality, that there are creators running this simulation, who are they and what's their motivation?
That's where we enter the realm of pure speculation. There are countless theories out there ranging from the whimsical to the downright disturbing.
Okay, hit me with some of the more popular theories.
One idea is that the simulation is a form of entertainment for advanced beings, like a giant, incredibly complex video game. They might be watching our lives unfold, intrigued by our dramas, our triumphs, our failures.
It's a bit unsettling to think of ourselves as characters in someone else's cosmic play, isn't it?
Yeah.
It certainly raises some existential questions. Another theory suggests that it could be a scientific experiment. Maybe these advanced beings are studying the development of consciousness, the evolution of societies, or the interplay of free will and determinism. We might be their lab rats in a giant digital petri dish.
So instead of watching us for entertainment, they're studying us kind of like how we observe ants in an ant farm, trying to understand their behavior.
Exactly. And there are even more philosophical theories out there. Some propose that the simulation could be a form of education or a test of some sort designed to challenge us, help us grow, and ultimately allow us to graduate to a higher level of existence.
So we're all just trying to pass the ultimate cosmic exam. I hope I'm getting a good grade.
Another intriguing theory is that the simulation is a form of ancestral preservation. Imagine a civilization facing extinction who decides to upload their consciousnesses into a simulated world, a way to preserve their culture, their history, their very essence for all time.
That one's a bit bittersweet. A way to cheat death, but also kind of digital afterlife.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder if we're interacting with the remnants of another civilization every time we log onto the internet.
Exactly. And the possibilities don't end there. Some even suggest that the simulation could be a form of art, a grand expression of creativity on a cosmic scale.
So we're living in a giant digital masterpiece that's a pretty mind-blowing concept.
It is, and it highlights the vast range of potential motivations for creating a simulation we might never know for sure. But the very act of speculating opens up a whole new way of looking at the universe and our place within it.
Okay, I'm officially hooked on this idea, but let's get back to reality for a minute. Even if we could prove we were in a simulation, what would we do with that knowledge? Would it change how we live our lives?
That's a question each of us would have to answer for ourselves. There's no right or wrong answer.
But knowing this crazy idea might actually be true, would it change how you live your life?
I think it would deepen my sense of wonder and curiosity about the universe. It would make me even more determined to explore the boundaries of knowledge, to seek out new perspectives, and to appreciate the intricate beauty of even the smallest details of our world.
I can definitely relate to that. It would make you look at everything differently, wouldn't? Like every interaction, every experience could be part of a grander design, a cosmic tapestry that we're only just beginning to understand.
Exactly. And it might also inspire us to be more compassionate and understanding towards others, after all. If we're all sharing the simulated experience and we're all in this together, regardless of our differences.
So in a way, the simulation hypothesis could make us more human, even if it challenges our very definition of what it means to be human.
It's a paradox, but a fascinating one, and it speaks to the profound power of ideas to shape our understanding of ourselves and the world around us.
All right, I think we've covered a lot of ground in this part of our deep dive. We've explored some of the mind-bending philosophical and existential implications of the simulation hypothesis. But there's still so much more to uncover.
In the final part of our deep dive, we'll delve into the future of the simulation hypothesis, exploring the cutting-edge research, the potential for proving or disproving this idea, and the ethical considerations that arise when we start to blur the lines between reality and simulation.
Stay tuned for the thrilling conclusion of our deep dive into the simulation hypothesis. All right, welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into the simulation hypothesis.
We've journeyed through the philosophical landscapes, grappled with the existential implications, and now I think it's time to turn our attention towards the future.
Yeah, we're stepping into a world where the line between reality and simulation might just become super blurry, where research could challenge our very understanding of what it means to be real.
And where the questions we've been asking about the simulation hypothesis might actually have real consequences for where human civilization goes from here.
Okay, so let's start with the big question. Is there any way to actually, like, prove or disprove the simulation hypothesis, or are we stuck just, like, speculating forever?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And while we don't have a definite answer yet, there are some research avenues that are pretty interesting that might help us see the real nature of our reality.
Okay, I'm ready for some mind-blowing possibilities. Lay it on me.
Okay, well, one line of inquiry is looking for glitches in the matrix.
Oh, whoa.
Some physicists believe that if our universe is a simulation, there might be subtle anomalies or inconsistencies in the laws of physics that could tell us it's artificial.
So, like, little cracks in the code that we could see with the right tools.
Exactly, like unexpected changes in fundamental constants, like the speed of light or the strength of gravity,
Right.
or like deviations from how particles are supposed to behave at the quantum level.
That would be so wild to find a scientific signature that points to a higher level of reality.
It would change everything we know, and the search for these anomalies is already happening.
Really?
Yeah, scientists are pushing the limits with observations and experiments using telescopes, particle accelerators, and all sorts of advanced instruments to explore the deepest mysteries of the universe.
It's like we're cosmic detectives trying to solve the biggest mystery ever.
And the clues might not just come from physics. The rapid advancements in artificial intelligence and VR could also help us understand simulation and consciousness.
Oh, wow. Okay, I mean, we're already creating crazy, realistic virtual worlds and AI systems that can learn and adapt. Could those advancements actually teach us something about whether our own reality is a simulation?
Absolutely. As we develop more and more sophisticated AI, especially AI that can think for itself and is self-aware, we might start to understand how consciousness comes about,
Okay.
whether it needs a biological brain or if it can exist in a purely digital space.
So by creating simulated consciousness, we might actually be finding clues about our own consciousness.
Exactly. It's like a feedback loop of discovery.
Whoa, that's so meta.
And if we get to a point where AI can create its own simulations that are impossible to tell apart from reality, it brings up some huge questions about what it means to exist and what's even real.
It's kind of scary to think that we might be close to making our own simulated realities, blurring the lines between creator and creation even more.
Yeah, it definitely brings up a lot of ethical issues that we need to think about.
Yeah, let's talk about the ethics. If we accept that we might be living in a simulation, does that change our sense of right and wrong? Does it affect how responsible we feel for our actions?
Philosophers and ethicists are debating this right now. If our actions have consequences not just in our world, but also in the bigger picture of the simulation, then the stakes are so much higher.
It's like we're playing a game, but we don't know all the rules, and our choices could have huge effects on the whole system.
Exactly. It makes us think really hard about what our decisions could lead to, not just for ourselves, but for the stability and integrity of the simulation itself.
It's almost like we have a duty to be good players, to play fair and consider the other players in the game world.
And if we're making our own simulated realities, we have an even bigger responsibility to make sure those simulations are ethical, fair, and sustainable.
So the simulation hypothesis isn't just a fun thought experiment. It actually affects how we live our lives, develop technology, and shape the future.
It's a call to action to approach the world with awareness, responsibility, and wonder.
Well, as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm left with a sense of awe at how much we don't know, a little bit of existential anxiety about what's really real, and a new appreciation for how powerful human curiosity is.
Yeah, it's a journey that doesn't end with clear answers, but it opens up new ways of exploring and challenges us to question everything we thought we knew about the universe and ourselves.
So where do we go from here? What can we actually do with this new understanding?
I think the most important thing is to keep asking questions, keep exploring, and keep our minds open to all the possibilities that are out there, both in our current understanding and beyond.
To embrace the mystery, the wonder, and the potential for discovery that's everywhere.
Exactly. To live with a sense of purpose, even if that purpose is ultimately shaped by a simulated reality.
And to never stop searching for the truth no matter where it takes us.
That's what the deep dive is all about. Thanks for joining us on this incredible journey.
We hope this deep dive has made you curious and left you thinking about the big questions.
Until next time, keep seeking knowledge, keep questioning what you think you know, and keep wondering.
And who knows, maybe someday we'll figure out what our reality is and what's beyond the simulation.
Or maybe the journey itself is the real destination.
That's all for this episode of The Deep Dive. See you next time when we explore more mysteries of the universe.
Until then, keep exploring.